So I'm going to begin by thanking all of you for taking time from your busy days to participate in this, and I also want to particularly thank all of the speakers and the people who contributed to this really wonderful and very successful workshop. We describe our policy recommendations as measures for countering mass violence in the United States to reflect a very sobering reality, that there is no easy solution or quick fix for these horrific events. As Chief Oates has emphasized, is no one policy change will come close to solving this multifaceted problem. A comprehensive approach is required. While the plague of mass shootings will continue for the foreseeable future, there are, however, measures that we can take to effectively limit their harm. Most of these recommendations will require legislative action at the federal or state level. Our policy recommendations are elaborated in a handout that has been circulated. So to leave time for discussion, I'm only going to summarize. And I'm going to put the recommendations that I'm going to emphasize here are ones that reflect the reflection of my own experience with the policy process. More years ago than I care to think about it now, I worked for Dick Thornburgh, who was the governor of Pennsylvania and who subsequently became the Attorney General of the United States in the Reagan administration. And one of the lessons I learned from that was that while there was a lot of gratification at really actually making things happen, I also became acutely sensitive to dealing with political realities about what can be accomplished. So I want to emphasize those. I'm going to give special emphasis to those that I think are non-controversial. As you'll see from your handout, the recommendations are organized under 5 headings, with each addressing a different facet of the problem. Oh. So the first heading is staunching the growth of high-capacity firearms. And here I'm going to move through this fairly quickly because I think it's been covered by the previous speakers. One is to ban the sale of high-capacity magazines of more than 10 rounds. The second is to ban other weapon accessories like bump stocks, which increase the discharge rate of the semi-automatic weapons. Chris has covered that in detail. These are terribly important, and I don't have anything more to add. Another component of the problem is curtailing access to firearms for individuals who are a danger to others or to themselves. One of these is universal background checks, which is an issue which I know is pending presently in the Senate, and there are important gaps in the current system of background checks, which, for example, one of the most important is they don't cover private sales, and often intrastate sales on the internet. These are kinds of things that need to be closed. Also, universal background checks are more effective when they're administered through firearm licensing and permit systems that require buyers to go through rigorous screening by state and local law enforcement. We've heard also from several speakers about extreme risk protection orders to disarm high-risk individuals. Again, I don't have anything more to add to that, but this is another important step. The other is to expand and strengthen firearm restrictions for convicted domestic violence offenders. April, again, I'm going to move pass this quickly, not because it's unimportant, but I think April described very well the limitations of the current system, and actually at an earlier workshop, Chief Oates talked about how cumbersome this system is, and it needs to be improved. We also need to adopt systems to identify and disarm prohibited gun possessors, particularly those at a high risk of violence. And again, that's been talked about already. One that Chris made passing reference to was installing monitoring systems to detect people making frequent purchases of firearms and ammunition. Note that gun purchase patterns, such as in the case of the Las Vegas shooter, can often signal very violent intentions. We also need to improve threat detection systems, and we've heard quite a bit from that, particularly from Adam. We've heard about that, and so we need to improve the capacity to respond to leakage, which was already described. But we also need to improve the capacity to detect leakage. And this is something that I want to elaborate a little bit more on, is that presently systems for monitoring, and particularly social media, as Chief Oates pointed out, that law enforcement manually tries to monitor social media. And because of that, there inherently limits their ability to monitor only a tiny fraction of the activity on social media. And presently, there are no good systems for detecting leakage using artificial intelligence techniques in the social media. I could go on at length about why that's the case, but part of the problem is that there is not the kind of data that's available to train these models to work, and there's not the funding available to do the research to develop. And this is, I think, a non-controversial thing, kind of action that should be addressed hopefully here at the federal level. We also need to have better systems for responding to nascent threats. And this was discussed, is we need ways. These are for people who are angry and frustrated and make threats, but mostly in these cases, they don't have strong intentions to carry them out. And we need to have better systems for identifying those people and appropriately handling them. Finally, I want to talk about reducing fatalities at mass shooting that Charlie was just speaking about. And here, we have to confront the reality that these events are going to continue, and they're going to continue in the future, and we need to get better at responding to them. And here I will relay a personal experience. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I had personal experience with Tree of Life. As a child, I went to religious school there. I knew one of the people who died at Tree of Life, and one of my colleagues was at worship there, and I knew the physician who I do research with, who happened to be on duty when the event occurred. And he, in particular, I want to reinforce all of Charlie's recommendations. He emphasized to me the importance of rapid response. And if the Pittsburgh police had not responded as rapidly as they did, and if the people at UPMC weren't as well trained as they were, more people would have died. And this is something that we need to continue to support. And then finally, The final recommendation involves data. We need important data for about these events, two forms of data. One, getting back to the mass response, we need to have good data on what happened at every event to improve the coordination and logistics of the way law enforcement and medicine responded to it. We also need good data to begin to answer some of these basic questions that, for example, April had to struggle with to try to come up with an estimate of how many of these shooters have, for example, just a history of violence. That we don't have data that you can actually easily answer those questions is unconscionable. We need to have comprehensive databases about these events so that we can know with certainty some of the basic facts. So let me stop there and leave this open for questioning.